If you'd like to open your Bibles, we'll be in Exodus 17. Here we got it on. Turn it on. Exodus 17. It's really good to see everyone here today. It's always a joy for us to be able to get together and study God's Word with each other. David mentioned about Sean that we continue to pray your prayers for him. He is improving in little ways. Still can't move anything below his neck. His head is getting stronger. He's turning it easier and faster. He's getting speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy every day pretty much. But it's going to be just a long road as he comes back from the weakness. The doctors are very positive that his main problem is weakness, but it was great to spend a week with him up there, and I really appreciate the prayers that you guys have given to us, the notes, the cards, the generosity. We're overwhelmed by the love that we've seen for Sean, and we really appreciate all your prayers for him. It looks like at some point, we're not sure when. So he is out of ICU. I meant to mention that. He's out of ICU. He's in a long-term care facility. So his kidneys are working well now, and the major body functions are there. He can't move yet. So there's a really good chance we'll be moving him down here at least for a while, because the recovery is just, we expect it to be a year or more to get him back to normal. So, normal for Sean. That was said of love. Earl understands. Okay. Earl just sang a song, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, I love to proclaim it, his child, and forever I am. After your baptism, what were your expectations for your life as a follower of Jesus? I think that song captures it for most of us, doesn't it? You know, I've been redeemed and there's great joy. I'm going to be his child, and I'm going to be his child forever. And then, of course, reality often hits. That's not always as easy as we make it sound. I saw a meme just the other day that said something along the lines, when you're teaching people the good news, don't forget to mention the wilderness. And I think that's really well put, that when we're teaching people about the joys of following after Jesus, there's often the trials that we face. And we see that as we look at the people of Israel, that they had that struggle also. I'm sure as they were leaving Egypt, Moses in the lead, they're leaving Egypt, and the people are giving them, food, and they're giving them gold and all these kinds of things. I imagine that there was an incredible amount of joy, don't you, as they were leaving. And then as they get into the wilderness, what do we see that keeps happening? They keep running into trouble of various kinds, and they really struggle in their faith towards God. And these are lessons that are intended to help us when we face those things, because just like the Israelites, we often don't deal with hardship and with suffering very well. We like to focus on the promises that have been made, and sometimes it's a long road to the fulfillment of those promises. Relationships, whether it's between a husband and a wife, or parents and children, or me and God even. Sometimes relationships are hard, and they require work. And building trust takes time and consistency and faithfulness. And you realize when I say those things, time, consistency, and faithfulness, the word that we mean there is proof. right? I mean, we don't like to say it that way. That's not a comfortable thing to say, but building trust takes proof to some extent. Why should I keep trusting you? Why would the Israelites hesitate to trust God completely? Exodus 17, beginning at verse 1. Exodus 17, beginning at verse 1. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of Jehovah, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test Jehovah?" But the people thirsted there for water. And the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of the land of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to Jehovah, "What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me." And Jehovah said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel. And take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go, and behold, I will stand there before you on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water shall come out from it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people, and because they tested Jehovah by saying, "Is Jehovah among us or not?" Why would the Israelites hesitate to trust God completely? We see another case here where they really struggled with trusting Him completely. I mean, they had seen great wonders, all the plagues in Egypt that had come upon them that they didn't have to face, but the Egyptians did. They had seen the parting of the Red Sea. They had seen all these things. But we also need to understand where they came from. They had been mistreated repeatedly by the Egyptians. And that had gone on for hundreds of years, as far as we can tell. The Egyptians had tried to kill the Israelites, to use them, to abuse them in so many ways, that it may have been difficult for them to look at someone's leadership and just put their trust there because of how badly they had been abused. As we look in this text, we see that the people are getting ready to move on to a new place, and the thing that stuck out to me as I read this is, as they're moving, they're doing it according to the commandment of Jehovah. That's emphasized. It's emphasized for a reason at this point. They were leaving because God told them to. Not only that, but He's leading them, isn't He? We're told in Exodus 13 that the pillar of cloud, which was Jehovah, would go before them and would lead them in the way. By night it was a fiery cloud, but that He was with them. Pillar of cloud, pillar of light, night and day. It would go before them and it would not depart from them. So Jehovah says, we're going. They're following that thing. And as they get to the place that God is leading them to, what do they find? There's no water. So we need to keep in mind here, because they left at His command, because they followed the cloud, the events that are happening here is not an accident. God led them to this place in the wilderness for His purposes. And of course, what they found when they got there was that there is no water for them to drink. And as we mentioned before, that's a big problem. Early in Exodus, we know that when they left, there were 600,000 men. So you have to add children and wives and animals, the livestock that they took with them, and you're talking about a tremendous amount of water that was needed by the people at this point. So they come to this place in the desert. They've been marching and there's nothing to drink. How hard do you think they searched for water? You think they sent out a few people? Maybe we should go, look over here, look over there. Let's find some water. But there's no water for them to drink. Now, what would really strike me as if I were them is that this is essentially the second time in a very short time that they have needed water in the wilderness. Previously, they had come to a place where there was water, but the water was undrinkable. And at that point, they had cried out saying, "We need water." It's a valid problem. Never forget that. Their need for water is huge. How did God solve that one? Do you recall? How God told Moses to pick up a log and he threw it in the water and the water became drinkable. People have tried to figure out what kind of log it was. It was the log that God told Moses to throw in the water. It wasn't about the log, right? It was the obedience that was there. Should they have learned a lesson from that incident? Well, certainly they should have. God can take what water is undrinkable and make it drinkable. God can lead them to water. He can lead them to a place where there's to drink. But here they are in the desert. There's no water. Can water just appear out of nowhere? You're going to answer yes, because God can do it. But they didn't think that way. They thought, like most people in the world think, is if you're in the desert and there's no water, there's no water. So it's not by a natural occurrence that it's going to happen. The people really didn't understand who Jehovah was. And that's going to be at the key of this issue. They had failed to understand who he was. Maybe it's because they knew of the gods of the Egyptians and they had seen those things. They had seen the signs that Moses did. But in their way of thinking, Jehovah is limited. And when you are out in the middle of a wilderness and there's no water, there's no water. And what are we going to do now? And you can tell by their complaints how serious they see this is. Did you notice the different languages that are, words that are used to describe what they did? Twice it says that they quarreled with Moses. Quarreled is a word that means to strive. So it's not just me and Jim arguing over something. Quarreled in this case is contentiousness, meanness. It may even be like a legal dispute, like I'm suing you kind of thing. You owe me this. So when they quarreled with Moses, they're saying, you've got to do something. And they're striving with him. Twice in verse 2 and in verse 7, it says that they tested Jehovah. So in this case, they're proving the quality of, will God do as God has promised? He's led us out here, so they're testing him. It says in verse 3, they thirsted, which of course they did. Anybody in the desert is going to thirst. Verse 3 also says they grumbled. This is the complaining part. This is the kind of grumbling that sometimes is translated as murmuring. It's the kind where I'm talking to my buddy side to side. What's going on here? We can't believe this is happening and not happening again. There is dissatisfaction in this grumbling. There is resentment. There is anger in this kind of grumbling. That essentially they're saying Moses doesn't know what he's doing. Or Jehovah doesn't know what's happening. And verse 4 tells us that they were ready to stone Moses. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, because that sets us up to understand how upset they were. It's one thing to say they were talking to each other about it and saying, oh, this is bad, this is bad. It's another thing to see them, starting to bend down and pick up rocks. They were ready to put an end to Moses. And what did they ask for? Give us water to drink. Is that a reasonable thing? It's funny how one statement can be said two different ways, right? If I'm in the desert and I need help from God, I can say, please give me something to drink, versus, give me something to drink right now. Tone makes a difference, doesn't it? Which tone do you picture for the Israelites here? To Moses and to, it was nasty, right? And they were ready to kill him. But notice also what they said. And these next two statements are key to understanding where they were at. They said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? They've forgotten not just that they were once in slavery, but they're saying to God and to Moses, the purpose that you had in doing this was to kill us. They don't give God credit for getting them out of Egypt. They impugn the integrity of Moses and of God, accusing them of the very purpose of killing them. And they have no faith, no trust that God is going to provide for them. Was it God's intention to kill them in the desert? Clearly it wasn't, and he had told them so. He had made the promise when he brought them out of the land that he was going to bring them to the land of promise. It wasn't his intention to kill them. You'll notice in verse 7 what the essence of their question is. Is Jehovah among us or not? And here we get to the real heart of the problem, don't we? What are they saying? In part, they're saying Moses is just this guy who's leading us through these things. I doubt that God's among us. I doubt that God's leading Moses. They want to know if he's going to act, and they want him to act right now. They don't believe. It's really not hard to imagine how they came to that conclusion, to that question. We see people in the world do it all the time. They challenge us along the very same lines. Maybe the Israelites thought like this. One, God is leading us. We made that clear, right? God's leading us. But now God has led us to some place where there's not water. Again. Never forget the again. It's part of how we're thinking. And if God is leading us, and if he really cares for us, then why would he lead us to some place with no water? Because what's our expectation? Our expectation is that if God loves us and God cares for us, the journey's going to be easy the whole way through. So, where's the water? So the next step of the thought is this. Is this God leading us, or is this just Moses leading us? And Moses doesn't really know what he's doing, obviously, because we're without water again. Is Jehovah among us or not? Show us, God, that you're really leading us. Because right at this point, what they were thinking is, God is not with us, or we wouldn't be in this place at this time with no water, so show us. Is Jehovah among us or not? It's a rough place. Now turn your Bible to Psalm 95 that Julian read a little bit earlier. So in Psalm 95, I want you to, before we get into the heart of this, I want you to notice how the writer in this passage refers to God as the rock of our salvation. God is our rock. Keep that in mind because it fits into the story, right? Because they get water from the rock. Yeah, so God is called the rock, and he's thought of as that way. So here, after it spends the first section of the psalm extolling how great God is, he then turns our attention on us to think about who we are. So beginning of verse 6, he gives us the call to worship, to kneel down before God because He's our God and we are His people. We are the sheep of His hand. Now, what do we know about the job of the shepherd taking care of the sheep? Right? Psalm 23, He leads me beside still waters. One of His jobs is to provide them food and water. A good shepherd is going to take care of his sheep. He's going to lead them to the places that they need to go so that they can be taken care of. And then He uses this example beginning in verse 8. Today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, on that day at Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof, though they had seen my work. For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. Therefore I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. So in this passage, Jehovah reveals to us just a little bit more about what was in the hearts of the people. We've seen it from the things that they've said, but what does God see in the hearts? So God sees inside them. And I know I put the silly x-ray up there, and there's a picture of the heart that's there, and we're not talking physical, right? He's telling us what's happening in their spiritual hearts at this time. And the first thing He says is in verse 8, don't harden your hearts. So here are sheep following a shepherd, and they are hard-hearted. Now in the story of the people leaving Egypt, who else was hard-hearted? The Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was hard-hearted repeatedly, wasn't he? How did he show that hard-heartedness? When they were asked to let go, he said no, right? But every time when there was a disaster, when one of these plagues came upon them, he was hard-hearted, wouldn't let the people go, and then the plague comes, and then he says, oh, I'm sorry, please make it go away, and it goes away. And then another one comes, but in that time when they should have been let go, he hardens his heart. Over and over again. The people of Israel were being like the Pharaoh in their stubbornness, only believing in Him so long as He proved Himself to them. Only long enough for the problem to stop, or for the problem to be resolved, and then we go back to being hard-hearted against Jehovah. It was the Pharaoh who said, who is Jehovah, that I should obey His voice? And isn't that almost exactly what the Israelites are saying here? Is Jehovah among us or not? Being hard-hearted means I don't really believe. And the people didn't believe God at this time. The second thing that God says about them, and He does it in one of the poetic couplets, is they put me to the test and they put me to the proof. So essentially, they're full of the doubts and the questions and the challenges. And you heard that a moment ago. Why did you bring us to the wilderness to die? You brought us here to kill us. Well, I think He could have taken care of that in Egypt if He'd wanted to, because the plague that came on the Egyptians could have hit them. Any of those plagues could have wiped them out. He didn't do that. But they're full of doubts and questions, so they're putting Him into this great text. This is where expectation meets reality. This is where their expectation said, we're supposed to be going home, and it's going to be a paved road, and everything's going to be beautiful and perfect. But then it doesn't happen that way, and the question is, why? Is God really among us or not? In verse 11, he says, these are a people who go astray in their hearts. What does it mean to go astray? It means you wander off, right? So instead of being focused on God, they were wandering off. In heart and mind, always thinking that things could be better if only. Eventually, the people would really demonstrate that at Mount Sinai when Moses was up on the mountain for too long. They go to Aaron and they say, make us a calf. And out it pops from the fire, right? They had gone astray in the heart, hadn't they? And they actually made an idol, that golden calf. A people who go astray in their hearts. That's what the people were doing here at these waters of Meribah, that we don't see necessarily in the text. They were not focused on God as the one who would save them and help them, so they started looking elsewhere. And that's a scary thought. And the next thing he says is in verse 10. They've not known my ways. Sometimes we miss that one. But it really says that they hadn't been paying attention to what God had been doing for them. Had God showed them repeatedly who he was. The psalmist actually makes mention of that. They had seen his works. God had shown them who he was. Had God shown them that he was almighty? Oh, it was so clearly, right? With all of those things, and the parting of the Red Sea, freeing them from the Egyptians. He can do what needs to be done. He can take care of them. But more than that, had he shown them not just that he could do those things, but he would do them because he cares for them. I think he's shown that. Because he wants to deliver them, because he wants to help them. Clearly, they didn't understand his words. It's one thing to say someone's very powerful, but then it's to say, he's powerful for my benefit. And they didn't make that connection. Instead, they keep doubting and questioning. They want proof. They want God to show that he's really with them, when all along, he's been showing them exactly those things. Their standard for God's behavior is about wish fulfillment. Everything should cater to them. Nothing should ever be difficult. And when something goes wrong, it's not their fault, it's God's failure. We're going to stop at this point. The next part of the lesson is to look at what Jehovah's actually doing for his people. But we're going to stop here because this is a powerful warning for all of us, isn't it? That in those times in our lives when we are in the wilderness, and we don't like to say it, but we know it's true sometimes, we feel like God's not with us. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with it in those moments where we've been following God, and then we come to a place where there's no water? Well, this sets up really a contrast of things we can do. The people of Israel chose to be hard-hearted and rebel and question God and say, why aren't you doing it this way? The way I would do it, the way I want you to do it. The proper response is trust. Because we know who God is, that even sometimes when we get in that place in the wilderness, I know that my God is mighty and he cares for me. He's a shepherd leading his sheep. And he's going to take care of me. You have a choice. We have a choice. We can contend with God. We can quarrel with him. We can test him. Or we can trust him. And when you hit these hard times, which we all hit, think about what's in your heart. And just like this psalm tells us, don't be like them. Don't be hard-hearted. Don't go astray in your hearts. Trust in God. Okay, so we'll finish this lesson, unfortunately, in a couple of weeks. But, yeah, we'll be gone 2 weeks. So, okay. Thank you for your attention this morning. If there's anyone here who needs our prayers or help, we want to help you with whatever struggles that you are facing. If you are not a child of God and you would like to take this time to become a believer by believing in Jesus and be baptized, please come forward as we stand and sing.
God calleth, yet I shall not hear.